All right, let's just get this. All right, is that loud enough? We can hear the audio demos. That's just a plain old song. Cool. All right. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is great. I'm James. It's nice to meet you all. So I really appreciate seeing all your faces, and I'm going to be giving you a talk. Why doesn't anyone use my library? Basically, just discussing the social aspects once you get all your technical stuff done that are involved in getting your code into production use. So I also sometimes like to call it how to build something useful and help it gain adoption by nurturing it for years and definitely not biting off more than you can chew. All right, that's my talk. See you next year. No, seriously. So I'm James. I'm the CTO at MediaPredict, a market research company. We're kind of loosely based in New York. And I'm also the creator of an audio library called Pydub, which aims to make things easy to do with audio, hopefully a lot easier than the Wave module and audio op. So can we try something just to show of hands? How many of you use Twitter? Wow, awesome. OK. And how many of you are able to connect to cellular or Wi-Fi here? Oh, wow. OK, that was better than I was expecting. All right, so this is me on Twitter. I'm going to open up my DMs. And maybe you can send me your questions for the Q&A as you think of them throughout the talk. That way we can kind of skip over that awkward initial phase where everyone's like, oh, what did he just say? So I'm just going to do that real quick. In the meanwhile, actually, I cannot multitask even slightly. So just bear with me for 1 second. All right, never mind. I totally forgot where they put the DM stuff. Oh, receive DMs for anyone. OK. Excellent. Invalid password. OK, just remember your questions. So let's get back to the original question. Why doesn't anyone use my library? Now, I'm not here to lecture you about documentation, unit tests, open source licenses, versioning, or semantic thereof, code of conduct, technology choices, collaboration tools. There's all kinds of resources out there on the internet that you can check out, and you should. Those are all worthwhile things to learn about. But I see tons of projects all over the internet where people have gotten all of that stuff right, and yet they still seem to be languishing in obscurity, which is really sad because just because you haven't thought of your marketing plan is kind of a bad reason for no one to use your code. So I think there's really 3 reasons for a given person to not necessarily use your project. One, obviously, if they've never heard of it, they can't choose to use it. Or they have heard of it, but it doesn't fit their needs in some way. Or they've heard of it, and it fits their needs, but they chose to use something else instead. Now, these are kind of roughly in chronological order from like when the person has a problem up until they actually use a project, or maybe they write their own solution. So if you've ever started an entrepreneurial project, which open source projects definitely are entrepreneurial in just the basic nature, kind of just like writing a blog or starting a band is an entrepreneurial endeavor, even though it's not technically entrepreneurialism. This is probably going to sound familiar to you. I was working on an application where users could upload audio of themselves talking, kind of like a social whatever. And we wanted to attach some audio to the end of it, like some appropriate theme music to go along. Should be simple, right? Let's look at some code. So we're going to open up this WAV file of Leonardo DiCaprio delivering a monologue from Romeo and Juliet. He was a user, by the way. No, I'm kidding. And then this MP3 of appropriate theme music to go along with it. And we just combine these strings together, and probably it will be a WAV or an MP3, right? All right. So obviously, this doesn't work. But maybe if we convert everything to waves first, then we'd be OK. So this actually doesn't work because WAV files have headers, and those headers include how much sound is in there, how many samples are in the data that comes afterward. So you do this, and all that plays is the first audio, which obviously doesn't help anybody. And if you do want to get everything working, it gets a little more complicated. So you open up files with the WAV module from the standard library, then you copy over the params from, I don't know, one of them. This code is actually broken. Don't use it. And then we do some manual accounting for how many total samples there's going to be. And we hope, we say a little prayer that they have the same number of channels. And write it to an output file. And let's see, what do we get? Where's Finder? I ran this code ahead of time because I've had bad luck with live coding. So here we go, Leonardo DiCaprio and appropriate theme music.
My lips, two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
We were both young when I first saw you. I close my eyes and the flashback starts. I'm standing there.
So the problem there is the sample rate wasn't right. The audio uploaded by the user was one sample rate, and the music was a different one, and we didn't handle that, which we already kind of have a lot of code, and we're going to have more to match sample rates. So this will eventually get so small that you can't read it, but let's move on. Also, that transition was a little abrupt, don't you think? Maybe a crossfade would be good. So take a moment. In a very brief moment of clarity and good judgment, I stopped writing code and went back to the internet to search around and see if anyone else had already done all this work for me. But basically all the solutions I was finding were PyAudio and Pygame, which are great libraries, but they do so much more than what I was hoping for, which is just play this audio and then play that audio. And it wasn't entirely clear to me, at least, if there was a simple approach to what seemed to me to be a simple problem, which in retrospect there probably was. But I went back to my code, and there's a few big factors that you need to take into account if you want to actually connect to bits of audio data in order to make them sound right. Number of channels. If you combine mono and stereo and you don't deal with this, you're going to have some fun. Every other sample will be on your left ear, and every other sample will be on your right ear. You don't want that. We already heard what happens when you get sample rates wrong, and bit depth is, well, that's another thing altogether. I'm not going to get into it. So did a little Googling, discovered the audio op module, which gives you some low-level operations according to the C source, cribbed from the SOX library. And that's the solution without crossfade. If there was a crossfade, we'd have, I don't know, a few more columns. And yeah, so then at this point, I think to myself, let me package all this up, maybe add a few more effects, and release it out to the world, and it will be great for everyone. And the next Porse app that comes along won't have to deal with all this. Fast forward a week, there's a new library on the internet. Big surprise, Pydub is on GitHub. It's got a star from me, which is huge growth, dude. We're up infinity% from last week. Shockingly strong response, killing it out there. In all seriousness, though, this isn't the first open source project I put on GitHub, and empirically, I shouldn't expect to get more than a few more stars. But that's not what happened this time. So I hope I can share a couple of things that I learned from this experience that I did differently on this project than my other ones, and maybe you can use it too. So I'll get back to these 3 reasons. I really encourage you to think about this. The person is going to use something else besides your library before you publish any code, if at all possible. Make sure there's a need out in the world for whatever your code does beyond just your own personal need. Search the internet, look at some blogs, Stack Overflow, forums. Look at what other people are trying to do. What are the solutions that are currently in use? What's good about them? What's bad about them? If there is a trend in the criticisms and complaints about the existing solutions, that's what we call in the biz an underserved niche. Niche? Let's move on. You might remember from Nick's excellent keynote this morning, when he's talking about 3 questions that you have to answer, what are the problems that I'm going to solve with my project? Why should the users trust me? And how am I going to get paid? Now, this is open source. It's essentially volunteering. So unless you have a plan, I'm going to skip the 3rd part, because I don't have an answer for you on that. But with Pydub, I sort of realized something that I have to give credit to Kenneth Reeds, because there's one improvement that you can make to almost any problem area that seems to work like magic, which is having a really nice API. Absolutely worth it. People will choose a more complicated and powerful option if they need it, if they need the performance, or whatever it is, they need the flexibility. But most of the time, if the power and the speed aspects of it are good enough, they're going to go with whatever is the simplest solution, whatever is the least amount of code, whatever is conceptually the smallest amount that they have to think about the problem. So for Pydub at least, the majority of users, they come in through either Stack Overflow questions or just direct with Google search. And they, like me, are hoping that it's going to be a simple solution, like that, for instance, including crossfade. And check it out. That's what I was hoping for at the beginning. So I do have a little bad news before we really get into the tactics, which is that it is sort of an entrepreneurial endeavor, and you're going to have to do some marketing type business people stuff. And I know that's not so much fun, but it is kind of a requirement to, I mean, people have to find out about it somehow, right? So we have this famous Edison quote: "Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work." That wasn't actually said by Thomas Edison. It was said by a random guy named Henry Dodd, and before that, somebody said something else kind of like it, which wasn't quoted in the newspaper, but they also worded it kind of differently. Successful man was out on the job, or woman, long before opportunity came a-knocking. And can you tell this was the 1920s? And the same opportunity, by the way, is oftentimes disguised as hard work. And if you don't like overalls or hard work or disguises, maybe this quote will inspire you. Much shorter, much more to the point, which was actually said by Marshall Brickman in the New York Times, and he was quoting Woody Allen. What I'm really trying to say is it's important to put in some effort consistently and to be responsive to the needs of the people using your code. This can be responding to email, fixing bugs, clarifying common misconceptions in the documentation, reading people's pull requests, implementing popular feature requests. It depends on the project, of course. But for example, one time I implemented the audio op library module in pure Python from the standard library, which I have to say was quite an adventure, reading through the C source of something cribbed by socks and then writing it all in Python. And then, to my vast surprise, I submitted a pull request to the PyPy project, and it got merged, which is very exciting for me. I mean, there's a little more to the story. I asked Alex Gaynor on Twitter if they were planning to support it, and he told me something to the effect of pull request welcome. So I sent one. Anyway, it's nice to make a big splash, have stories like this, but you can't just fall off the face of the earth after that. These kinds of open source is social, and if you're not around, then consistency is important. I don't have a justification. It just is. And continuing on my point earlier about making simple things simple, Pydub doesn't try to take over your whole project. You want to combine two audio files. It's just you import the module, and that's it. So the thing about frameworks, libraries make it easier to do some specific thing. It provides some functionality that's already debugged, and you can plug it in, and it's great, does some of the work for you. It's essentially what you would plug in to a modular system. Frameworks, on the other hand, they have opinions about how you should approach the whole problem, which means if you already started your work and you do a Google search and you find a framework, I mean, this is a little bit of a philosophical point. Unless you have a really popular blog or some way of influencing lots of people, looking at U37 signals, you're going to have a much easier time building and maintaining libraries. Because if you come across, for instance, the Django ORM and you go, wow, this is really great, you don't just plop that into your Flask project. It's not a great idea, and it probably won't work for you. So You can build a framework in open source. It's not like you can't do it. Lots of people have. It's not impossible, but that's essentially playing on hard mode. And you're going to have to do even more of the marketing and business development kind of stuff that you probably aren't that excited about to begin with. So that's kind of part of a broader point, which is you should really try to avoid biting off more than you can chew. This goes into the libraries versus frameworks thing, but it also crops up in other areas. Like when you first start a project and you got stars in your eyes and you want to tell the whole world about your amazing new creation and how easy it's going to be great. And you go and you create a Twitter account, a Facebook page, a YouTube channel, LinkedIn group, Pinterest board, Tumblr, PHP user forum, an artisanal handcrafted documentation website, and a blog, and a mailing list, and a Google. And unless you're prepared to invest time in each one of these things that you start up, the project is going to start looking neglected really quickly. I mean, I don't want to pick on anybody, but I'm going to pick on somebody. When people come across your project's Twitter account and it's only got 2 tweets and they were 4 years ago, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence. So before you start with all these marketing things, just try and figure out how much time you can reasonably dedicate to non-code, non-technical types of things. And if you're not sure what you can do, be conservative, right? I mean, you can always start up the mailing list in a month if you need it. So for Pydub, by the way, I just did a search for .js on Twitter, and I only had to scroll like maybe 2 pages worth before I found an abandoned account that hadn't been used in 4 years. Anyway, so for Pydub, that means just GitHub, Stack Overflow, and PyPy. There's no forum, there's no dedicated social accounts, there's no mailing list. Rely on GitHub pretty heavily. GitHub gives you a lot. So there's a bare bones landing page, which just gives you a quick overview of what you can do with the library, just like the elevator pitch, as they say. We use GitHub issues for bugs and features. All of the documentation is just markdown files in the repository, so you just click in there, and they're nicely formatted. They render out as HTML on GitHub. And then in the authors file, there's my personal email and Twitter account, in case anybody wants to reach out to me in person, which turns out a lot of people do that. So I don't know. I mean, I prefer to have these conversations in public so everyone else can see, but you know, I'm not going to ignore people's questions. So it's just GitHub, Stack Overflow, and PyPy, so people can pip install. Skip that one. And I subscribe to the Pydub tag on Stack Overflow with my RSS reader, which I don't know. I'm a big fan of RSS. I think RSS is the bee's knees. So when people ask questions, I can just go right over there and see what's going on. Anyway, Nick made a really good point this morning. Your time is valuable, which is absolutely right. And I want to say, everything I'm talking about is under the assumption that you want to invest time, and that growing a project is something that's important to you, and that you want to grow your library's adoption. Obviously, this is not mandatory. I'm putting this in strong terms, but it's obviously not mandatory. Like, it's your time. It's a volunteer effort. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. So you have to, whatever you can commit, just try and figure out something that's going to work for you, because it does take time for things to catch on. That adopter curve, like the first 2 standard deviations, 3 standard deviations, are very narrow on that adoption curve of any technology. So it's not like you put a library out there and 2 weeks later you've got 1 million users. It could be, but you kind of have to be in it for the long haul. For the vast majority of projects, it is that slow adoption curve. And so when people find your project and they think it looks great, most of the time, and we've all done it, you start on GitHub and you go, OK, I'll save this for later. But if they come back 6 months later, the trick is to look just as good and well-maintained, so that, you know, because if you come back 6 months later and it doesn't look like that, you're like, oh, well, it's abandonware. I'm done. So don't forget about Woody Allen's quote either. And don't forget about your research. When you create the library and you're looking for alternatives, you're going to find forums and Stack Overflow and all kinds of stuff like that. You could circle back after you create the library and leave your answer, leave the solution that uses your library to let people know. Now, I don't want to advocate spamming. Do not spam people's forums. If your solution is not better and shorter and much, much more awesome, either fix your project or don't leave a comment. But still, I mean, everyone is treading the same path as you when they're solving their problem, and go back along that path and let people know. I mean, that's what it's about. It's not spam if it really does help them. So I'm almost done. So I'm sitting there on my couch with my wife, and we're taking turns playing Destiny. And I think she's probably working on Buckshot Bruiser or Pull the Pin or something. I'm pretty terrible with grenades. And I decide I'll check Hacker News because it's her turn. And imagine my surprise when I find that Pydub is right there on the homepage. And needless to say, I missed a few Crucible matches, replying to comments and tweets and stuff. So if you've made something good and you've been responsive on Stack Overflow and bug reports, social media, however you're marketing your project, some people are going to think that what you're doing is great and they're going to share it. And that part is just luck. I mean, you don't get to control what other people do. It's just luck, pure and simple. But if you keep investing the time, sure enough, eventually it is going to get noticed. People are going to value your work, and word will get around. So to recap quickly, I don't think we're going to have time for questions. Solve a problem people actually have. Look around at existing solutions. Listen to what people are saying about them. Make sure your solution is really nice and easy to use. That means having a friendly, easy to understand API. And whatever docs, you need to explain it. Pet peeve of mine is docs where you can't actually run the code. Like, I know it's boring as a documentation writer to put the imports in there, but really, it helps beginners. Don't overcommit by starting all kinds of initiatives that you can't follow up on in the future that are just going to get abandoned. And finally, just keep showing up. More likely than not, it's going to be a long, slow rise as you go up that adoption curve with a few lucky breaks peppered in along the way. Just keep showing up. And that's the talk. So I think maybe we have time for like one question.
What RSS reader do you use?
Reader for Mac. It's good.
Is there some way you decide to put time into a project? Do you stick it up and wait to see if anyone finds it on their own, or do you know, like, this is the one that people will actually like if they put time into it?
Yeah, so I mean, an easy way to gauge that is as you're doing your research, you kind of can, I mean, you'll get a sense for how many other people have the same problem as you. Like, there are dozens of questions on Stack Overflow, like, how do I convert an MP3 to a WAV, or how do I append audio? And so if you come across tons of other people asking the same questions, it's a pretty good indicator that there's not a lot of good solutions. And if you have to go read the C source of some Python module, that's a very good indicator that there's not a good solution. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. You just kind of wing it. I just published this, and then, like I said, long, slow rise. And all right. Thank you.